Well, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank her. Thank her.
Thank you, Madam Ranking Chair. People don't think we get along, but actually, some of us do get along. Oh, sorry. Okay. Administrator Power, thank you for your service and for your testimony. And it's always good to see you. You said in your testimony or your written testimony, the world faces a daunting list of challenges: extreme poverty, disease, the global food crisis, shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic and Putin's war in Ukraine, getting children in school or back in school, attacks on democracy in the world. And thank you. The U.S. international assistance and the USAID just does such critical work tackling these challenges. I am alarmed because what I have read, I have no inside information, but I have read that the House Republicans have committed to cutting the budget levels to what could actually be a 30% cut to U.S. international assistance. I hope that's not true, Mr. Chair, but who knows?
Well, keep you on your toes.
He'll keep me on my toes. Uh-oh, that is ominous. So I would like to just bring a focus attention to an issue, a subject matter that's always been important to me, and wanted to know what this means for what I consider an already marginalized group of people in many places in the world, the women, the girls and women of the world. Because if I look at the facts and the figures, the cuts to USAID's family planning could cause many, many more maternal deaths, children starving, children not getting into school, and as you said, the potential of health, I'll call it health hazards around the world. So let me ask you maybe you could expound on some of those concerns. First of all, what would these budget cuts mean to the girls and the women of the world? If it was a 30% cut or a 25% cut?
Thank you, Madam Congresswoman, for raising this and for allowing me to try to concretize this. I mean, first, I'll just take the 22% cut as the 30% I can't even wrap my head around. But certainly we've been hearing about proposals along these lines. This would take USAID back and the State Department back to budget levels not seen since the year 2010. So that was 13 years ago. You can imagine what we know, cost of living, and how far a dollar goes now compared to then. So the cut, whatever the cut is, you can extrapolate from there. With regard to the populations that you've described, let me just say in terms of emergency assistance, our humanitarian experts say about 80 million fewer people that we would be able to feed, in a sense, to keep alive, because this is life-saving food. When it comes to maternal and child health, this would mean about $20 million less for that programming. That would mean about 19,000 maternal and newborn child deaths, but also 13 million fewer kids getting vaccinated. And that, of course, will mean over the long term about at least 115,000 more deaths. I would also just draw attention to the kinds of issues that affect all of us, like pandemic prevention. If these kinds of cuts went into effect, our global health security budget, of course, would be massively affected. We are now working with 50 countries to try to enhance their surveillance capacity, their lab capacity to be able to spot a pandemic before it becomes something of the scale that kills millions of what we've just gone through. We would actually have to cut the number of countries that we are working in by a fifth. So again, if something happens to happen in those countries, we would not be in a position to work to strengthen that ability to spot early. Those are just a few examples.
All right, well, with that, we'll sadly yield back. I want to just follow up on this whole issue of education, because this is something I think we all can agree, is that an educated population means a more prosperous and peaceful population. And I think we're all very worried about almost generations losing access to education, especially in some of these conflict areas. We heard, Mr. Chair, if you remember, you had a very compelling committee meeting where we heard from some of the women in Afghanistan. And we've heard what's happened to education there. I met recently with women from Ukraine and also heard their sad tales. And, and I'm sure you are well aware. So what my concern, again, I want to go back to the budget cuts. And what would be the effect of you're saying a 22%, I'm saying maybe it's a 30%, both are alarming, cuts in terms of educating or making sure children of the world are educated. And how does that affect the security of the United States? Because I think that's what our folks want to know.
Well, if you look at, let's say, a 22% cut to our the education budget that we had over the last year, you're talking about $300 million or so, if not more, going to basic education and higher education. I mean, some of the, we've all had the experience of meeting ministers from other countries who, credit the inflection point in their career being a USAID provided scholarship, back when they were younger. I was at the American University of Beirut. We're still supporting that. The American University of Afghanistan, which is now operating, based, of course, not in Afghanistan. I mean, these are investments in stability and safety. At the basic education level, we're reaching this year about 12 million girls with our education programming, which is only a small fraction when you think about the level of need, particularly post-pandemic. We aim to increase that to 15 million with a 20% budget cut, depending on how we would allocate the cuts. You'd be looking at 3 million fewer girls getting reached by U.S. basic education support. And in terms of the costs of not being educated, it just makes you very susceptible to all the wrong things. And we know in particularly growing swaths of sub-Saharan Africa and West Africa, how extremists have come in and exploited the diminishment of livelihoods that the drying up of large lakes, has caused as fisher people go out of business, as pastoralists lose their livestock to drought. Then what? Who shows up? What do they offer? Well, if you can't move to a city and potentially, get access to some kind of skilled, labor opportunity, then maybe when that extremist comes along and that recruiter for Boko Haram or ISIS or whatever the latest deadly, monstrous movement is, maybe that becomes a more appealing choice. So that's why education can't wait. What we just talked about in conflict areas and crisis areas is so important, but that's why our basic investments across areas that are suffering really steep economic headwinds. Kenya now, they're calling it this, instead of Silicon Valley, the Savannah Valley. They're producing more tech professionals, more engineers, than most advanced economies. And that's in part because of these investments that we've made. In Nepal not long ago, I went to a school that USAID supported, and I asked, what everybody wanted to do, and every single girl and boy alike raised their hand and said they were going to be an IT professional or an engineer. And that's in part because they've gotten exposure through USAID basic education and gotten the skills that they need to put themselves in a position to apply to universities, not only in Nepal, but anywhere in the world they can compete. And that's an investment in prosperity, which in turn is an investment in our stability.
So as I swear I have a few more minutes, but as we think about these budget cuts, just from your perspective, what is your biggest fear as to what happens to the United States' place in the world?
Well, I mean, it's no secret that the we're not alone in making development investments, and the PRC's investments are ones, again, as we've discussed, that emphasize dependence, not independence. They're much more extractive in nature, fueling their own economy on the backs of taking minerals out or other natural resources. And they're elite to elite and not investments really in the people. Indeed, often, as you know, the PRC brings in its own workers, and even the job benefits are quite limited of these large infrastructure investments. So, for us not to be involved, to be scaling back at a time when the economic headwinds have grown much worse, when we've seen the first drop in global life expectancy since the 1950s. I mean, is that a moment to cut back when life expectancy is going down? When we see the good that a program like PEPFAR did, not only for the 25 million people who got access to life-saving treatment, but to U.S. standing in communities that were affected by PEPFAR, you see how it changes forever the way America is seen. And when we call on countries and urge them to join us, let's say in a sanctions effort or to open their doors to an American company, that matters. That standing matters. The regulatory environment, the enabling environment that USAID has worked with countries to help shape with American businesses and private sector investment in mind, that matters. So we do not want to cede this terrain to those that don't want to create more openness, more transparency, more, again, entry potential for American businesses any more than we want to cede the terrain to extremist recruiters.
And like China.
Like the PRC.
Okay.
Indeed.
You're back.
Thank you.